This is Focus on Your Health on the KJAZ Radio Network. It's brought to you by Kingman Regional Medical Center in historic Kingman, Arizona. I'm T.G. LaFredo, and this week my guest is Dr. Jacob Oldham, orthopedic surgeon at Kingman Orthopedics. We're talking about nutrition for endurance sports. Dr. Oldham, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, TG.
I'm glad to have you. Thank you. Last time we talked, we touched on your background as an athlete, as a runner, as a triathlete, and it seemed like there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, that topic certainly opens up a whole bunch of other doors. I know that you're a runner as well, TG. And
I try.
So we've talked a little bit about running, you and I have, and I got into kind of the endurance sports through running. I started running quite a bit when I was deployed my first time is when I really started hitting it hard. Prior to that, I'd done a couple marathons and, run just to stay in shape for other sports, but never really done it for its own sake very much. But I started working on, my form and improving my times and seeing how fast I could go. And anyway, started doing a lot of reading on the subject.
Right. And that was when you really began to appreciate just how much nutrition plays into training and preparation.
Absolutely. Nutrition it's like putting fuel in your car.
Yeah.
If you put diesel fuel in a regular vehicle that doesn't run on a diesel engine, things don't go so well. So it's nutrition is very, very important. Not just the kind of nutrition, but the timing of the nutrition and what kinds of food you're putting in. And it's kind of like the octane rating on the fuel. Right. Some fuels have higher octane ratings than other fuels, and it's the same for the foods that we put in our body.
There is this cartoonist, and his pen name is The Oatmeal. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm not.
Okay. And so he does these funny cartoons and drawings, but he also likes to run long distances. But he doesn't want to talk. He's mentioned this before. He doesn't want to go into depth about his nutrition because he mainly running long distance for him is an excuse to just sort of pig out.
I see.
So, and I imagine there are a fair number of athletes who fall, or sort of, they're like half in and half out, and this is part of their regimen.
Yeah, I think that there is a large segment of the running population that goes and says, "Oh, I ran today, so I'm going to give myself a treat."
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
I'm all about living life and enjoying what you're doing.
Right.
And if that helps you live life more enjoyably, that more power to you. It's just great to be out there and be active.
Okay. So I want to talk about some of this stuff because similarly I have heard in gyms, which I don't spend a whole lot of time in gyms. I like to be out, not in, right?
Yes.
But I've heard like the kind of bodybuilder guys, and they talk about cheat meals. And I wonder what a cheat meal is really. I've heard them rationalize it and say, well, a higher fat meal will spark and it will make and it will get your body to, and I kind of don't know if that's, what's the deal with that?
Well, so you really have to start with defining your objectives.
Uh-huh.
If your objective is to build muscle mass, you're going to eat one way. If your objective is to lose weight, you're going to eat a different way.
Sure.
You're going to do different types of exercise. If you want to lose weight, you're going to be doing the longer distance, type activities, or more aerobic centered activities, where if you're trying to build muscle mass, you're going to do the weightlifting, lower reps, higher intensity, right. Higher weight type exercises with more rest in between. And that tends to push your body into one hormonal pathway or another in terms of muscle building or fat breakdown, and both are very effective at utilizing energy. But once you define your objectives, then you kind of go from there as to what kinds of training I want to do and what kinds of foods should I be consuming to help with these objectives. In general, your body composition is probably composed about 80% by what you eat and about 20% by your activity level.
Okay.
Now, that's for most of us. Now, somebody that's really a real gym rat in the gym all the time, they're pushing it more to where their activity level is playing a higher role in their body composition. But food is still, greater than 50% of the determination of what their body looks like is going to be determined by what they put in their mouth.
Right.
That's why it's so important to those guys.
And I kind of get where they're coming from in terms of eating higher fat and higher just density kinds of meals. I don't want to I like to go long distances, so I don't want to carry that kind of weight with me. I don't want that kind of muscle. I want to be
lean.
Yeah, so that I have less to carry and less to worry about. Every pound matters.
Yeah, exactly. If you're running a marathon, imagine throwing a backpack on and putting an extra 10 pounds in there and running a marathon.
I'll pass on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the same thing if you've got an extra 10 pounds of muscle or fat.
Right.
At least with the muscle, you get some energy utilization out of it. It adds to your carrying capacity.
When I first started running a little bit longer distances, I thought, 6 miles today, 7, 10, 12. I don't need to eat when I run 12 miles. Who needs to? And I find out, it makes for a much better performance. And when you tell that to people who aren't running or who don't do that sort of stuff, they say, you eat while you run? Yeah. You have to eat while you run.
Absolutely. Because your body depletes those stores of energy, the ready stores. It's called glycogen. And it's stored primarily in the liver. But your body uses that during the first hour or so of exercise. That's the ready fuel that your brain needs to function and your muscles need to function. And then over that period of time, your body's also processing whatever you have in your stomach and trying to churn that into ready fuel as well. You're trying to get all the pathways working so that fuel finds its way to the muscles when the muscles need it. Otherwise, you bonk. And, years ago, that was a very common thing in exercising activities that were like marathons or that type of a distance. People would bonk because they weren't focusing on getting the proper nutrition. Right. Their body would run out of fuel, very literally. And then at that point, your body still has fuel in it, but it has to do other things in order to utilize that fuel. It has to break down fats, break down muscle, and those they take more energy out of your body per energy that you get out of it. Right. Instead of these ready-made fuels that are already prepared for your body, for your muscles and your brain to utilize. Right. And then you don't end up, it's called catabolism, but you don't end up catabolizing the muscle tissue that you really want to stick around to help you run the rest of your race.
I've had times where I'll come back from a long run and my wife, who's also a physician, will say, "You're ketotic." And, I'll say ketotic? No, ketotic. So I'm burning ketones and I guess it's kind of gross, but it's like this ammonia kind of scent.
Yes. Yeah. And that happens when your body has been utilizing proteins as its primary fuel source. See, our bodies are basically a flex fuel system. We can run on glucose or we can run on fats and proteins. And there are two different pathways, and your body almost has to flip a switch when you've got ready-made glucose, of which glycogen, that ready fuel I told you about that's stored in the liver, is part of that glucose chain. When you have that, your body can process it immediately. When I say process, your body can utilize it immediately. Right. You don't really have to do much to process it. Now, when you run out of that fuel, your body flips the switch into the alternative fuel source, which is proteins and fats. And those have other molecules in it which your body has to split in order to make those proteins and fats into the kind of fuel that your body can run on. And so as it does that splitting, the byproducts create that the kind of the ketotic smell, a little bit like ammonia.
Yeah. So in simpler terms, then, if I allow it to get to that point, does that mean I haven't fueled my run properly?
Well, it depends on your objectives. If you really want to fat burn and you don't mind burning a little bit of lean muscle mass, then you're okay burning that fat, but you're certainly not going to race at your highest level if you're in that stage. Now, the other thing, though, to note is that no matter how much you fuel in the glucose or the types of fuel that your body can use right away, a readily available fuel like glucose, no matter how much you do in the super long distance things, we're talking like 5, 6 hours, 10 hours, 12-hour type races, your body cannot possibly remain fueled on that one source. It has to learn to run efficiently on the other storage fuel sources like fat and protein.
Okay. Now when we get into those 12-hour races, we're talking about your triathlons that you've done.
Yes.
Right.
And, for the longer distance triathlons, for the ultra marathons, for
an Ironman,
for anything like that, you really have to train your body to run efficiently on fuel sources that are not just glucose, because your body needs those proteins as you're going in order to keep moving. And you're going to be burning some of your fat and some of your muscle, and that's normal. You can't possibly keep up with the energy demands otherwise.
Time for a quick break here on Focus on Your Health. We'll be back in just a moment for more with Dr. Jacob Oldham. This is the KJazz Radio Network. Welcome back to Focus on Your Health here on the KJazz Radio Network. This week I'm speaking with Dr. Jacob Oldham, orthopedic surgeon at Kingman Orthopedics. We're discussing nutrition for endurance sports. I want to know what you learned about fueling your body, and we could probably look at it in stages, as in, before or during your training, and then as you're preparing for the race, of course, you're tapering, and then day of.
So one of the most important things to learn is how your body reacts with certain kinds of food. You have to get used to eating while you exercise. Now, let me back up. That really only applies if your typical aerobic exercise is probably 60 to 90 minutes or greater.
Okay.
If it's less than 60 to 90 minutes, you're going to be just fine because your body's glycogen stores are enough to get through that period of time, and maybe a little bit longer. But if you're planning on running for, say, a half marathon or longer, it's probably worthwhile for your body to get used to taking in maybe 100 calories worth of glucose. They make these shot blocks or other things, or jelly beans, or gel packs, lots of different options. Right. Or even just drinking Gatorade or something like that. It's important to note that your body can't utilize the fuels without water. Right. Proper hydration is absolutely critical to performance. Once you start training your body to metabolize the fuels while you're exercising, then you can start playing with it and figuring out, well, what kinds of foods do I eat that don't make me feel slow and heavy, that give me the energy that I need? Realizing that once you take those foods in, your body's needs time to process them, and to get that sugar into your bloodstream will probably take a half hour or so. Right. So you start figuring that glucose is going to be available for my body to use in about a half hour, 45 minutes. A little bit. Yep, you got to plan ahead.
When you first start having to eat while you're running or while you're biking, it's really kind of a foreign thing. But the more you get used to doing it, you find you can really listen to your body. Your body will tell you it's going to be time a half hour from now.
Absolutely. And you notice, you start feeling, I'm getting too much in my stomach. And you may not know how you're going to feel in 15 or 20 minutes, but you know how you feel right now. And if your stomach's starting to feel like it's not using up and processing that food you've put in, then you need to slow down. Right. Either slow down your exercise level or slow down how fast you're putting food into your stomach to give it time to process that. Because it tends to be, your body has a system called the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. And the one side is responsible for the fight or flight response. That's the sympathetic system. Right. And so when your muscles are all revved up, when your adrenaline's pumping, that's your sympathetic system that's revving. And when that's going, it tends to stop your body's digestion process. Okay. Now, the parasympathetic system is the opposite. It's the system that works on your stomach's intestines to process the food and to metabolize it. It also does some other things like salivation and things like that. You might notice you have trouble having a bowel movement when you're really, it's not until you've settled down and are in a relaxed position where your body feels like, okay, I can go to the bathroom.
Right.
Now that's the parasympathetic system. At any rate, one of the things you have to train your body to do is do a little bit of both at the same time.
Okay.
But the higher the intensity exercise, the more your adrenaline's going, the more difficult your body has to process or to digest the food that you've put into it.
Right. So you need to plan your diet accordingly.
Yeah.
When you are, let's say, we'll back away from race day. When you're 2 months out and you're training, how long do you train, by the way, for an Ironman?
Well, you need to start at a level where you're already at a level where you can do like a half Ironman distance.
Okay.
And if you're already at that level, you could prepare for an Ironman in, 5-6 months fairly easily.
Do you usually keep yourself right in that neighborhood so you can?
I do.
Yeah.
I try to stay in a position where I could compete at that. I may not be at my top form, but I could make it through a distance, that type of a distance race without killing myself.
Okay. So we're already beginning with a pretty serious level of fitness, but let's just pick up from there. At that point, you're probably 5 or 6 months out from race day.
Mm-hmm. And so at that point, you start working on getting, you've got to get enough protein in your body because every time you exercise, you break down proteins, and it's through that rebuilding process that your muscles get stronger and more adept at whatever sport it is that you're focusing on. As a triathlete, I was swimming a lot, biking a lot, and running a lot. And so I had to get my muscles used to those kinds of activities. So I was getting lots of protein in my diet. I really tried to concentrate on the clean carbs. You mentioned, cheat meals, but the opposite of a cheat meal is a clean meal, getting good proteins in your system, getting good carbohydrates. And a good carbohydrate in my mind is something that's natural, as minimally processed as possible.
What are some examples of these meals?
So I would eat, I was deployed during my Ironman training. And so I'd go to the cafeteria and get my meals, but they would have shredded carrots. And I would eat my spaghetti with shredded carrots. And I'd put spaghetti sauce on shredded carrot, meat sauce on shredded carrots, so I get plenty of protein. I get lots of carbohydrates, good carbohydrates from the carrots, and tons of nutrition. I would eat that as opposed to spaghetti itself. Now, there's nothing wrong with spaghetti if you like pasta.
Right.
It's good in limited quantities. But the problem with pastas and breads are that there's really not much nutritional value. It's energy without the molecules that you need to process that energy. So anytime you take, there's a term called empty calories, which people use to describe sugars and starches.
I always
and things
hear
like
them talk about it with beer.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And that's true for anything that's like a glucose or a sugar or a starch that doesn't have any nutritional value beyond just the energy of the calories in it.
Okay.
Now, the fact is they're not really empty calories. They're negative calories. They are a net deficit on your body because in order for your body to utilize those calories, it has to take the vitamins and the nutrition from somewhere else in your body to use those calories, to turn those calories into energy that you can use when you're exercising or to turn it into fat. It's actually sucking nutrition out of your other storage in your body, your bones, your marrow, your fat stores. It's taking the nutrition out of that. So over time, that puts your body into a nutritional deficit.
Sure, yeah.
You may not be malnourished, but you don't have the right kinds of nutrients in your system to process the food that you have. Now, there aren't a lot of great studies in this type of a person. I mean, we've got good medical studies in folks that are chronically malnourished, and we call it chronically malnourished, where people aren't getting enough food. But I think there are a lot of people that are subclinically malnourished in America, and not because they're not getting enough food, but because they're not getting enough nutrition.
Right.
And they get plenty of food, but they don't focus on getting fresh fruits and vegetables in their system, and the leafy greens especially is where we get tons of our nutrition, or the highly processed foods tend to wash all of that out. Anyway, I digress as we're talking about triathlon training, but that's my answer to your question about what is a good carbohydrate: as minimally processed as possible with as much nutrition in it as possible.
Okay. Now let's move on down the road in training, and we're getting near race day. Mm-hmm. So it's been months of hard work and, trying to watch your diet and fuel mm-hmm. yourself properly. So then I don't know what it is. Usually it's a few weeks for a marathon. How long do you taper? And by that, I mean, you start to wind down the activity. You let your body get some additional rest as you prepare for the big race day.
Yeah, I think a 3-week taper is probably about the right amount.
Okay. So during that 3-week taper, you're backing way off. We're talking about a ton of output up until that point, and now you're backing way off on your exercise. You're trying to get some more rest. You're trying to fuel up. Mm-hmm. What are you eating during that stage?
I decreased the total number of carbohydrates that I was getting in general because I wasn't using as much. And so I really wanted to avoid gaining any extra weight. Yeah. When you're for an Ironman triathlon, you're riding your bike 112 miles and running a full marathon. If you add an extra pound, that's a lot of extra work that you're putting out over the course of the race day. Yeah. So you want to avoid gaining extra weight since you're tapering off on your activities. But in general, I just keep eating clean. I would splurge every now and then by maybe having, an ice cream cone or, things like that. But I would try to avoid that being the norm. Right. And I would keep eating a lot of protein and clean the carbohydrates that I would eat. I'd focus on getting clean carbohydrates in general. We talk about a taper, basically 3 weeks before the race, I was perhaps exercising, 6 hours on some days. Right. I'd go ride my bike for 4 hours and then maybe run for 2 hours. And then maybe the next day I might swim for an hour and a half. And so I was putting in quite a bit of time, but as we taper down, the week before the race, you're really only exercising an hour and a half, right. Or maybe even 2 hours total in that week, because really your body is like a battery in some ways. It can store up energy, or it stores up its ability to withstand hardship, mm-hmm. Essentially. And so you're you want to save all of that for race day, but you want to stay loose and you want to keep the muscles moving so that they don't forget what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. Do you get close to race day and, you've put all those miles in, you put all that time in, you start to feel like, okay, I've got this distance, it's okay? Or do you ever kind of get anxious and think, oh, I don't know, it's pretty far?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of endurance athletics is in your mind.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about maybe 60% physical and about 40% mental. Yeah. Which is why you'll see some of the best endurance athletes are usually in their 30s and early 40s often, because so much of it's just mental toughness. They're past their prime physically, mm-hmm. but they're just hitting their prime mentally.
It's the experience and all the training, and they figured some things out.
Right.
Yeah.
So you gain confidence. The more you do something like that, the more you feel like, what, I can handle this. It's not such a big deal.
In fact, that's just part one of my discussion with Dr. Oldham. Please join us next week for more on nutrition for endurance sports. I'm TG LaFredo. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next Saturday at 11:30 a.m. right here on the KJazz Radio Network.